As Father Callahan mentioned earlier, the topic for our little meditation today is Mary and hope. To be honest with you, several months ago when Father O'Brien was asking me about the novena, I actually suggested the topic. It strikes me, in all honesty, that we may very well be living in times when we all need a little hope. And in order to engage this meditation, I'd like to begin with a story. It may very well be a story that I've told before, and if I have, you will have to forgive me. I do so much teaching and preaching that I can't remember what I say where. But this is, and this will tickle Carl, the organist's fancy, this is yet another one of my little Cape May stories. It's something that happened a couple years ago when I was in Cape May for one of my little mini retreats. And one day I happened to be sitting on the mall, and I was sitting opposite the Catholic Church, which is at the end of the mall, and the name of that Catholic Church happens to be Our Lady Star of the Sea. Across the street from the mall, across the mall itself, there is a bakery directly across from the church, and I was sitting on a bench. It was about 8 or 9 minutes to 11, and I was waiting for the 11 o'clock daily Mass to begin. And as I was sitting there waiting for the Mass to begin, I could hear to my left the door of a clothing store that's located right next to the bakery open up. And out of this store, I could hear some people coming, and I could hear these voices. It happened to be some women who were coming out of the clothing store. And as I turned to look at them, I actually heard them before I saw them. And the reason why I heard them was not so much their voices. The reason why I heard them was that there was all this jangling and bangling going on. And when I turned around, I saw these two women dressed from head to foot in black, absolute black. Black boots, black jeans, black shirt, black leather coat, and on top of all of this, they were sort of covered in chains. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the two of them together could have started their own Goodyear tire store. In the days when we used to put chains around tires in the snow. And as I was watching them walk by me, I thought to myself, and it wasn't the most charitable thought I ever had, but I thought to myself, I would not want to run into either one of these two in a bad mood. I thought that they could probably pulverize me without a lot of assistance. And as I was sitting there thinking all of this, and they were walking by in front of me, I heard one of the women say to the other one, "Oh, look, there's the Catholic Church. Let's go in and say a prayer for Jack." I haven't got a clue who Jack is, but they disappeared into the church. And it's now about 2 or 1 minute to 11. And so I go into church for Mass. And I see the two of them sitting up front near the altar, and the priest came out, and they stayed for Mass. And I was right behind them at Holy Communion time, and I would say that, using our contemporary lingo, we might say that they were not particularly well catechized, and maybe they weren't even Catholic, but when they went up for Holy Communion and the priest went to give them Holy Communion, I could see that they took Holy Communion between the index finger and the thumb, which is not normally how we do it in most churches. And instead of saying amen, they simply said to the priest, "Thank you." They went back to their pew after consuming the Blessed Sacrament, and I thought to myself, well, I guess that's not the worst response when somebody gives you a sublime gift. Thank you is not the worst thing to say. And I can't imagine that the angels in heaven are losing much sleep over this. But what really caught my attention was after Mass was over, the two of them went to the shrine of Mary, which in Our Lady's Star of the Sea is located to the left of the main altar. They put in their offering in the box, and next to each other, they knelt on the kneeler in front of the statue of Mary, and I presume that they prayed for Jack. After they finished their prayers, they get up and they jangled their way out of the side door. And as I was sitting there, I began, as I often do, to think about what had just happened. And the thing that I was thinking about is this: what is it about Mary that attracts them, that attracts you, that attracts me to the kind of hopefulness that she exhibits to us and for us? You know, I am part of that very quickly fading generation that learned their religion, at least in the first years of their lives, from something that we used to call the Baltimore Catechism. Until I was in the 6th grade, we studied religion from the Baltimore Catechism, which, as some of us will remember, was a series of questions and answers. When I got to the 7th grade, we abandoned the catechism, and we got religion books with niftier titles, like People of God and the Living Church. And as we abandoned the catechism, ironically enough, it also came in for a great deal of criticism. One of the criticisms, of course, was that we tended to learn our religion, as we said, by rote, by questions and answers. But in the intervening years, I've sometimes wondered to myself, which is worse? To have rote answers or not to have any answers at all? And one of the little lessons that I learned from the Baltimore Catechism is that sometimes the questions are as important and maybe even more important than the answers that we give. Who is God and why did God make me are the most profound sorts of questions. And they take an entire lifetime to answer. But there was a question in the Catechism, some of us might remember it, in certain editions of the Catechism. It was question number 123. And the question was simply this: what is hope? And the answer was, hope is the virtue by which we firmly trust that God, who is all-powerful and faithful to his promises, will, in his mercy, lead us to eternal happiness and give us the means to obtain it. This was not a bad answer, and it bears repeating. Hope is the virtue by which we firmly trust that God, who is all-powerful and faithful to his promises, will, in his mercy, lead us to eternal happiness and give us the means to obtain it. And there was a subsequent question that followed it: what are the sins against hope? And the sins against hope were presumption and despair. Presumption, I suppose, is a very close relative to what we would call optimism. And despair is a very close relative to what we might call pessimism, which are very different than hope. Optimism is me walking down to Germantown and Chelton Avenue to buy my Powerball ticket, which if you've been keeping abreast of this, you will know is now calculated to be $195 million. The cash value is $115.8 million. I've been doing my homework. I don't have my ticket yet, but I've been doing my homework. That's optimism. Pessimism is what will happen when I don't win. But hope handles weightier matters. Hope is what kicks in when you lose your job or can't find one. Hope is what kicks in when you go to the doctor and he delivers into your hearing something that you would rather not hear. Hope is what kicks in when someone is taken from us or when something falls apart. That's when hope goes to work. And what underpins that hope, of course, as the Catechism reminded us, is trust in the mercy of God. Hope begins with a sum total of 0. The poet Daniel Ladinsky has a beautiful little poem called Zero. He says, 0 is where the fun begins. They're busy counting everywhere else. 0 is what happens when we realize that we have no place else to go but into God's merciful arms. And that somehow or other, that God watches over us in the midst of all of that. At the risk of embarrassing one of my siblings who may very well be sitting out there somewhere, I remember a number of years ago when I had a little bump up with a health issue. One day I got a package in the mail. It was this thing, I guess you would call it sort of like kind of a sewing thing that my sister had made, and it was sort of like an embroidered needle thing. It was that little story about footprints in the sand. You know, there are 2 sets of footprints, and God always promises to be with us, but suddenly there's only 1 set of footprints. And the person says, oh, I thought you were always going to be with me. What happened? One of the sets disappeared. And God responds, I didn't leave you. That's when I carried you. Hope kicks in when suddenly we realize that we can't even walk on our own. And that somebody else has to carry us, and that somebody else is God. We come to God in only one of 2 ways. Either we come to God dressed for dancing, or we come to God carried in on a stretcher. No matter which way it is, somehow or other, in the midst of all of the messiness and the crap that life sometimes deals out to us, God is with us. Which in a sense brings me back to Mary and to Our Lady, Star of the Sea. In his second encyclical, Pope Benedict wrote about hope. The title of the encyclical was Spe Salve, which means saved in hope. It's based on St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, verses 24 and 25, where Paul says, we are saved in hope. But hope in what can be seen is not hope. Hope is when we trust in what we cannot see, because that is where we learn patience. That's where we learn that God has not abandoned us. And in the 49th paragraph of that encyclical, Pope Benedict looks to Mary, and he calls Mary the Star of the Sea. And the image is a simple one, that often in this voyage of life, we find ourselves in stormy weather. And we find ourselves in darkness. And we need a star. We need a light. And in part, Mary is a dimension of that light. This is the woman who, in the midst of a very strange pregnancy, continued to hope. This is a woman who, when she thought she lost her 12-year-old son, she continued to hope. This is a woman who, in the midst of possible embarrassment of people who may have run out of wine, she continued to hope. This is a woman who, watching her son being executed, continued to hope. And she stands as a reminder to us that God never abandons us, and that always in God we are saved in hope. There is an old expression: the will of God will never take us where the providence of God will not watch over us and care for us. In the storms and in the darkness, God walks with us and sometimes carries us. This is hope.